Hi, I'm Bob Wolverton, your Northwest Realty Advisor. And how are you on this fine day? Me? I'm pretty excited to get going on this particular topic. I've wanted to do it for a long time. So in today's episode, we're going to talk about what to expect in the home buying process as a first-time home buyer. I get lots of questions all the time about little things that usually real estate agents take for granted because they do it every day. But for a buyer, they don't do it every day and it's new. And so I can give you a brief overview of what to expect so you'll go in better informed and be able to ask questions of your agent up front rather than being surprised on the back end. So that's the topic of today's episode, is what to expect as a first-time home buyer. So as a first-time home buyer, I've got a list of items here on the screen that we're going to go through. Now we're going to talk about forms, what forms to expect, because it's not just one form, it's a lot of forms. And we're going to talk about the appraisal process, we're going to talk about inspections, we're going to talk about closing costs. There's a lot of information here, so admittedly, I'm going to go through it really fast because, again, this is YouTube, and I'm trying to keep these videos short, and even as it is, just going over it very quickly, it's still going to take quite a while. So let's go ahead and get started. So when you're a new home buyer, the first thing that I recommend that you do is that you find an agent. Now, one of the things that if you're new to buying and selling real estate that people don't realize right off the bat is the fact that an agent for a buyer is free to the buyer. In essence, the person selling their home pays the commission for not only the agent representing the seller, but they also pay the commission for the agent representing the buyer. So as a buyer, why would you not use a professional real estate agent who can give you expert advice all along the way, completely free to you? So definitely find yourself an agent. Now, I also say finding an agent is the first thing that you should do. And what I generally see sometimes is people will go online or they'll talk to a lender and find out how much home they can afford, and then they'll find an agent. The problem with that is it's kind of backwards in the fact that you want expert advice from your agent, and your agent can give you expert advice on good quality lenders. And what I mean by a good quality lender is a lender that has a reputation of closing on time virtually 100% of the time, because you don't want to get to the closing date and you've either given notice of where you're renting or you've already sold your home or whatever your circumstance is, because you know that you're going to be moving in a certain date, only to find out at the last moment that there's a delay in your loan and now you're not going to close for another 3 days or another week. It just upsets the apple cart on everybody's part, and that's what you want to avoid at all costs. Matter of fact, I was just at a birthday party this past weekend, and it was interesting because I was talking to a woman who is an attorney, and she was telling me about a friend of hers who was just trying to buy a $2 million home, put down $20,000 earnest money. But the deal fell through because the appraisal was late, couldn't get done in time. There was delay after delay. And I said, oh my gosh, that sounds like lender X, Y, and Z. And she goes, it is. That's exactly who it was. Well, because that lender has a horrible reputation. And as an agent, I know that, and I can advise you to steer away from them. Obviously, I'm not going to say it in a YouTube video because I don't want to get sued. But as expert advice, I can say, traditionally, they've got a pretty poor reputation, whereas on the other hand, these lenders have a very good reputation. So you want to stay in that. Just going back to the same story, not only did the appraisal get late, was messed up because of the lender, she was also using a discount broker who made a mistake in it. So she wound up not getting the house and losing her $20,000 in earnest money. Just the worst outcome you could possibly have. So find an agent first, get your expert advice up front so that you don't run into those types of situations. Now, as the agent recommends a lender to you, what you want to do is you want to get pre-approved. And there's a difference between pre-qualified and pre-approved. Pre-qualified basically is a very informal process. You just verbally report your income and your debts and that sort of thing. And they say, well, based off of this information, this is basically the realm of what you're looking at, of what you can afford. Based on that information, then you can get more specific on the various products that a lender has to offer you and what might be best in your situation. And then from there, you move into getting pre-approved. And that's where the lender checks your credit report. They want proof of income. They want to look at all of your debts, your debt to income ratio. And they say, absolutely, positively, based on this information, we would be able to give you a loan in this amount. So in essence, you are pre-approved. The only thing left then is for them to approve the house through the appraisal process. So what you do is then you take that pre-approval letter and you submit that with your offer. So you tell the seller, I already have my financing squared away. I am ready to go. I am pre-approved on this rather than pre-qualified, which makes your offer much stronger. Then, when you've got all this, you're ready to start shopping. Now, working again with your agent, you've defined your criteria, what area you're looking at, what type of home you're looking for, and they can set up a search for you. So as soon as a new piece of property comes on the market, you get an email alert about the availability of this property, and then they can help you see those properties. They can help you evaluate those properties, compare properties, and decide if you want to make an offer. So you get to the part where you want to write an offer. Now, when you write an offer, there's quite a process to go through. So you would think, oh, writing an offer is relatively easy, but there's a whole bunch of forms to expect. Normally, on a normal residential single-family transaction, you're going to be looking at about 5 forms and a pamphlet, and there might be more forms that would be situational to the particular situation. Then you're also going to need your earnest money, and we'll talk about that. And then there's a funny thing that pops up occasionally called capacity charges that first-time homebuyers usually aren't aware of. So we'll talk about those too. But first, let's get back to the forms and what forms to expect. So you're going to have the Form 21, Purchase and Sale Agreement, 22A, your Financing Addendum, 22D on Optional Clauses, 35 is your Inspection Addendum, 35E, Escalation Addendum, 35P, Pre-Inspection, and then the pamphlet on the law of real estate agency. Now you begin to see why you might want to hire a real estate agent. But let's pop over and let's look at some of those forms. So the Form 21 is your basic purchase and sale agreement. This is a 5-page form, and basically this delineates the basic aspects of the offer that you're going to make. You know, who the buyer is, who the seller is, describes the property, the purchase price, the earnest money put down, the remedy if you were to not fulfill the obligations of your contract, whether you're going to forfeit the money or whether the seller has an election of remedies. Generally, you want to do the forfeiture of earnest money because that's a whole nother topic, but that's the best, safest way for you to go as the seller. But the idea is that you don't forfeit your money, that you go through to conclusion or to closing, and you get this house. Okay, so you've got this 5-page form here, which is your basic purchase and sale agreement. There's a lot of criteria in here, and your agent will explain all of these. It's not the purpose of this video to explain each one of these forms, because again, we just doing a broad overview. Additionally, you'll have a 22A, which is your financing addendum, which is going to describe the type of loan you're going to get, how much money you're going to put as a down payment, and whether you want to waive this contingency or whether you want to exercise this contingency. And this is all spelled out in your Form 22A, which is also a 2-page form. Now you've got your 22D, which is your optional clauses. And basically one of the things that's going to happen is that as the buyer, the seller has to buy a title insurance policy where you're the beneficiary, so that if there's anything that ever pops up on as a cloud on the title that would adversely impact your value in that property, this insurance, this title insurance will cover you. At the same time, as the buyer, you have to buy a title insurance policy for your mortgage company that you will protect them. So in step 2 here, this delineates specifically what type of title insurance the seller is going to buy for you. Additionally, it talks about systems and appliances. So if any of the appliances break between the time you get mutual acceptance and closing, it's the seller's responsibility to repair or replace those. We talk about the utilities. It says anything left behind by the seller automatically becomes your property. So that's in writing in this contract. If there's a homeowners association, you have a review period for that. And again, we talk about that in my video on how to make your offer more attractive in the eyes of the seller, because this is a contingency that you could do due diligence up front and take this off the table so that the seller's not worried about you getting out of the contract. But that's a whole nother topic and a whole nother video. Now you've got your inspection addendum here, Form 35, which basically says you want to do an inspection. It gives you specific criteria of how many days you have to do the inspection, and basically what your different options are in response to the inspection. It also has a neighborhood review contingency in here, so you can find out more about the neighborhood and then decide if you want to move forward with the sale of the house. Now, in some situations, and especially in the greater Seattle area right now, we are having such a competitive market that you may want to do an escalation clause, and the Form 35E would fulfill that. And again, I've got a whole nother video on escalation clauses. We'll talk more about that in that particular video. Then we've got the pre-inspection agreement, which basically gives you permission from the seller to do the inspection because you need written permission to do that. This form accomplishes that. And it also states that basically if you break anything during the inspection, that you'll fix it and that you'll return the property back to the condition that it was. So if you have to modify anything or move anything, that you just put it back the way that you found it. So that's all spelled out so everybody's clear on the expectations. And then you'll also get the Law of Real Estate Agency pamphlet. This is a 7-page pamphlet that describes agency law under Washington State guidelines. And basically the important thing to understand here is the agent that's representing you, are they representing only you, or are they representing the seller and you? Which I don't know that you can do both. I've got a complete another video on dual agency, and that's what it's called, the dual agency, when an agent represents both the seller and the buyer. That's called dual agency. It's got complications. I've got a completely different video on that. But the purpose of this form is for you to understand that agency law, and then for you to be clear, is your agent representing you, or are they representing the seller, or are they representing both of you? Now, generally that's delineated in Form 21 on page 1. Let me get back up here. In item 15, agency disclosure. So it says the selling broker, which is the person representing the buyer, the check right here would be just the buyer, and then the listing broker represents just the seller. That's the most optimal situation. Now, like I say, go look at my other video on dual agency. We talk about this a lot more in that particular case. But that's the whole purpose of the agency law pamphlet, is so that you're clear on who's representing you and whether there's a potential conflict of interest there. Okay, so after we get through the forms, we submit the forms as your offer, and then the buyer says, oh, I love this offer. They sign it, send it back. Okay, now we're in mutual acceptance. So the next thing you have to do is you have to make your earnest money deposit. Now, the earnest money deposit is basically a good faith deposit, and it does apply towards your down payment. Now, the larger your earnest money, the more committed the seller will believe that you are to going through with the sale. So let me give you an example. If you do a $250 earnest money deposit, you might find another house and say, oh, I love this house. You know what? I can afford to forfeit $250 so that I can go and buy this house. So you do that, and the seller gets your $250, but they've suffered a loss of time and expenses that are probably far greater than $250, and then they have to start the process all over again of listing their home, finding another buyer. So there's all this wasted time and expense for the seller. Whereas if you put in, say, a $5,000 earnest money deposit, you're much less likely to want to forfeit that money. So you've got more skin in the game, and you're more likely to go through to closing to complete this transaction. And in essence, you've got more skin in the game. But that also makes your offer more attractive in the seller's eyes. So if you've got a $5,000 earnest money deposit, or even $10,000 earnest money deposit, that's telling the seller you're pretty committed to this deal. Whereas if you only have a $500 deposit, you're not as nearly committed as the guy that's doing the $5,000 or the $10,000 deposit. And like I say, it does apply towards your down payment. Now, when you enter into a purchase and sale agreement and you get mutual acceptance, you are in a legally binding contract, and that puts conditions on you as the buyer of things that you have to do by certain timelines. And if you fail to do that, you're in violation of contract. And the penalty, there's legal consequences, and the penalty could be that you would wind up forfeiting your earnest money. So it's very important that you understand there's the possibility if you don't fulfill your obligations under that contract. So it's also important that you understand all of the components of your contract. Capacity charges. This pops up in homes that are generally newer than 15 years. So if what happens is a home that's hooked up to a sewer system, when it's newly constructed and added to a sewer system, the organization that runs the sewer, whether it's the water and sewer district or whoever, they have to build additional capacity to take on all these new homes into their system. So there's a charge for that. That charge is amortized over a 15-year period. Once it is 15 years, it's all paid up and you don't have capacity charges anymore. But say the house that you're buying is 10 years old, well, there's still probably 5 years left on that. So there's a balance. So then you have to decide how to deal with that. You can say, oh, Mr. Seller, I want you to pay the capacity charges, or I am willing to assume and continue the monthly payments for the next 5 years until it's paid off. But that's something that would be written up in your offer. And it only pertains to houses that are 0 to 15 years that are connected to sewer that'll have these sorts of capacity charges. But if you've never dealt with it before, it's something new, very common, very easy to deal with. But again, I just want to mention it so that it's not a surprise. Now, we've got mutual acceptance, we've got our earnest money deposit, now it's time to do an inspection. So you can do a structural inspection. If it's on septic, you'll do a septic inspection. You may want to do a pest inspection, but 99.999% of the time, you're going to want to do a structural inspection. Now, I'm going to toggle over here to an inspection report, and let's go up to the top page. This is an inspection report that's 53 pages long, and I will tell you right now, the work that the inspectors do for the amount of money they charge is a fabulous value. Here you've got a 53-page report that goes through virtually everything about the house. It'll identify things you would have never thought of. They're not necessarily deal breakers, and they're not necessarily things that you want to have fixed, but you will know every little detail right down to missing caulk in a corner. And then you can use that information to decide whether you want to move forward or whether the information contained in the report's a deal breaker, or if it's something you want the seller to fix. So let's look at this real quick. Like I said, this is 53 pages. We're obviously not going to go through all of it because it would just take way too much time. But you can see right here from the table of contents, these are all of the things that the inspector looked at. They get in the crawl space, they get into the attic, they take photographs for you, they itemize issues that they identify in the home. I mean, it can be something as simple as in the bathroom, it doesn't have a GFCI plug near the sink. Well, perhaps the home is old enough that when it was built, that wasn't a code requirement and it's just never been changed out. So you can decide whether you want that replaced, because it will be called out in inspection. That'll say there's no GFCI outlet near the sink, it's too close to water. And you can either say, yeah, I want you to fix that, or I can live with that, or I'll do that. When I move in, I'll hire an electrician to do that, or however you want to remedy that, because it's definitely not a deal breaker. And there'll be that sort of thing that you'll find in the inspection reports where it talks about there's perhaps the beauty bark's been pushed up against the wood siding, so it's actually too high. Well, it basically just needs to be removed from the siding because it retains moisture, which will cause rot, so you don't want dirt or beauty bark contacting wood. And they'll call that out on the inspection. But it's definitely not a deal breaker, but it's certainly something that you want to be aware of when you're buying a home. So let me just skip down here real quick and just kind of give you some examples of what they show. So like in this example here, we say missing caulk around this window. Again, we see more missing caulk. Here, caulk on the seams, cracked, deteriorating caulking. So there's a lot of caulking here on the exterior. There should have been caulking put in around these lines. Right here, there's a cracked shingle. Let's scoot down further, find some more important stuff. You know, there we had a nail head popping through the shingle, what called an undriven fastener. It's popping up. Again, these may not necessarily be deal breakers, but it's something that you want to know when they're buying the house and know what the condition is. In this case, the weather cover on this exterior outlets, the cover's cracked. This should have a flashing right here, so the inspector calls all this out. A hinge in the garage door is cracked. Again, this gas line right here should be secured. So they call out all sorts of stuff. Like I say, this is a 53-page report. And as you can see, they get into the crawl spaces, they get into the attic, they take these sorts of photographs for you. It's a good value, and it's something you certainly want to. Overall, even though this one's got a lot of photos and stuff, this one isn't bad. All these reports look like there's never a perfect house. Even brand new construction, you do an inspection like this, the inspector is going to find things that the subcontractors didn't do 100%. And so you can get those remedied in new construction. So here you've got the gas line. It should have hangers on it so that it's properly supported. In this case, it's not. That's definitely not a deal breaker, but it's something that can be easily remedied and something you want to know as a buyer. So anyway, that's what you can expect with an inspection report. So let's get back onto our plan here. Now, we've got our inspection report done. We are ready to move forward. Your bank is going to send out an appraiser. So let's say your offer was $500,000. The listing price was $500,000. You offered $500,000. Your offer was accepted. So now the bank's going to say, we want to make sure that that house has a market value of $500,000 or more. So they send out an appraiser. If the appraiser says it's worth $500,000 or more, you're good to go. Now, the problem will be is if the appraiser comes out and says, now the market value on this house is only $480,000. So the bank will only give you a loan value of $480,000. You've got to make your down payment on that. And so depending if you got a 10% or 20% down payment, then the balance would be the loan amount. So you're going to be $20,000 short here. So you have options to deal with that. On the appraisal, you can go back to the buyer and say, hey, Mr. Buyer, the bank says the market value on your home is only $480,000. So would you be willing to reduce your sales price to $480,000 so I can get a loan on the house? And you can make the argument that nobody else is going to be able to get more of a loan because the appraisal says it's only worth 480. So you could make that argument. Or you could walk away from the deal altogether, or you could make up the difference in cash. Say, I will just make a larger down payment. My bank's only going to consider the house worth 480. I'll put in an extra $20,000, in essence, making a larger down payment so that you can still get your $500,000 sale price. But this would be something that you would negotiate based on the return on the appraisal. Usually appraisals come in pretty close to value or above the asking price, but this market has been getting so competitive with so many escalator clauses, this could be an issue, and you need to be prepared on how you're going to deal with it. Closing costs. This is always the big one. Okay, so you know that you're going to have your down payment, and you know you need to bring funds to the table at closing, but how much funds? So let me give you an example of what a closing statement looks like. And let's see. Like all the other forms, I've redacted people's information here so we don't get into any privacy issues, but this is an actual closing statement for a particular house where the sales price of the house was $519,999. The buyer put down $10,000 earnest money. There was an additional credit of $144. Now, there's additional debits that go in this column down the center here. So what you're going to have is the prepaid interest on your loan. Now, real quick, and your lender will explain this to you, is that when you have a closing date, say on the 15th of the month, your first house payment is not going to be due in 2 weeks on the first of the following month. It's going to be due on the first of the month after that. And interest on a mortgage is paid in arrears, so the interest in that payment is actually for the previous month. But what they want here is the prepaid interest between the closing date and the first of the following month. You're going to have to pay interest on that loan. And that's the amount here. In this particular case, it was $717 and some change. Same thing, then you're going to have to prepay the interest on prepay the payment on your homeowner's insurance from the closing date to the regular cycle period for the homeowner's insurance, and then you'll have to also make the payment on the insurance, which will be included in your closing costs. Let's see, what else have we got in here? The title insurance that you have to buy for your mortgage company. So those charges in here, the $557, the $784. Settlement fees, money to the HOA, and then recording fees and so on like that. In this particular case, the additional charges of this closing were another $5,700. So not only does the person have their down payment that they're putting to satisfy their bank, they've got an additional $5,700 in closing costs. Now, whether you can wrap that up in the loan or need to bring additional cash, that's a conversation that you'll need to have with your lender. But just know that in this particular case, we're looking at a purchase price of just over $500,000. This person was actually putting down $175,000 as a down payment, and they still had $57 in additional costs. So just be aware that you're going to have those sorts of costs. When you select a lender, they will give you an estimate of what these costs are going to be, and then as you get closer to closing date, they will give you a final statement like this one. If there's a substantial difference between the estimate and the final amount, you have 3 days to review that. But generally, your loan officers are pretty sharp. They know what they're doing, and their estimate's going to be pretty close. So you'll be prepared moving forward of what you can expect. Okay, then once you get your closing costs, you bring your additional funds to the table, you bring your down payment to the table, you're pretty much set to go. In essence, you've bought your first home. So that is a really quick overview in 20-some plus minutes of what you can expect. I've got other videos on the various things, like I said, dual agency. Let's see, what's the other one that I talked about? I forgot already. And I'll do one on inspections or something like that also, so keep your eye on this channel. I hope you found value in this brief overview, or this 20-minute overview, which for me is too long for YouTube, but there's a lot to cover here. So I hope you found value in it. If you did, please click that subscribe button. That's all that I ask. All these topics, they deserve more detailed discussion. If you'd like to talk more about these, contact me. I'm in the greater Seattle area. You can send me an email through the comments down below, and I'll get back to you. I'm Bob Wolverton, your Northwest Realty Advisor. Thank you for your time.